I think, the state kind of sold to a lot of folks who receive these licenses that you just open up your doors and you make tons of money and you can become a millionaire overnight. But certainly it's not the case.
Welcome to Sisters Inc., our podcast for and about women business owners, brought to you by Black Enterprise. I'm your host, Elisa Gums. Black women are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in America. And on every episode of Sisters Inc., we'll sit down with one successful CEO and share how she slays the challenges of being a Black woman in business. Today's episode is all about blazing a trail in cannabis. We're chatting with Arana Hankin-Biggers, president and co-founder of The Travel Agency, a cannabis dispensary that is working to change how people view cannabis and to repair the damage caused by the war on drugs. Welcome to Sisters Inc., Arana, and thanks so much for sitting down with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be here.
You have such a fascinating story. Tell us about your professional life before you became an entrepreneur and what made you want to get into the business of cannabis.
Yeah, I actually began my career in New York State politics. I worked for David Patterson, who was formerly a New York State senator who represented Harlem for many, many years, and he became the governor of New York State, if you recall. When Elliot Spitzer got caught up with a prostitute many years ago. It was a very challenging time, but I loved working in government because you were really able to make a tangible impact in people's lives. So initially when I started working with David in Harlem, in his district office, I was helping people from being evicted from their homes, helping them gain access to benefits, to food stamps, to Medicaid, to Medicare, helping them get access to childcare, real life issues, right? And as we grew, I started working on a lot of economic development initiatives because there was a big movement afoot to try to redevelop 125 at the time and really inject a lot of capital into central Harlem to help to subsidize building affordable housing and things like that and to create jobs primarily. And so I got really interested in economic development policy and worked with David for a number of years in economic development policy. Also in Albany, when he became governor, I was the first director for the Atlantic Yards project in downtown Brooklyn. So I oversaw the construction of the Barclays Center, which is, the arena where the Nets play now, and it included a number of towers, which was supposed to be a substantive amount of affordable housing units, contracts to MWBEs, which is minority women business enterprises, and jobs for local residents and people of color. And many of those promises the developer made to the state in exchange for the state overriding local zoning to allow them to build these very large towers and to finance the arena really never came to fruition, right? Very few people of color actually benefited from the construction of the Barclays Center or from the adjacent affordable housing units. I became really frustrated working in government. I also was the first project manager to oversee the Columbia University Manhattanville expansion project, where Columbia had a very robust community benefits agreement also, just like they did on the Atlantic Yards project, which required Columbia to contribute to create jobs for local residents and educational opportunities for local residents. And I literally was fighting with Columbia almost weekly because they did not want to deliver any of those benefits. I thought they had done enough already for Harlem. And so I got out of government and did this mid-career program that I was introduced to by a friend for kind of mid-career folks who worked in placemaking and real estate development and architecture and design, which was at Harvard. And they pay you to go to this program for free and hang out and really do whatever you want for a year, which was tremendously impactful. But it led to me being able to get this amazing consulting gig in New York City, working for a real estate consulting firm that was kind of known for spearheading the Highline Project. And I worked on post-Superstorm Sandy urban planning initiatives. So working with communities of color who were most impacted by Superstorm Sandy and pulling together a community engagement process to determine how to spend federal dollars for rebuilding those communities. So I've always been really interested in economic development policy and specifically how it helps people of color. And so coming into working cannabis was really, for me, felt like a natural segue, which is why I was attracted to working in the cannabis industry, because the mandate that the state legislators outlined in the legislation which legalized cannabis for recreational use, creating opportunities for people of color, for women, for people who have been disproportionately harmed by the war on drugs. But something that, I'm still very, very passionate about is figuring out ways to use new economies and new projects and real estate to really help folks of color.
Wow. There are challenges that all entrepreneurs face as they're launching their business. What was the startup process like for you?
Cannabis comes with so many unique challenges. It's a nascent industry here in New York State, and trying to formulate and design a business that fit into the myriad of regulations that are required that the state has outlined, right? So these state legislators, elected officials, I've written a bill and essentially drafted regulations that dictate how cannabis businesses can operate in New York State. But most of these legislators, I would say probably 99% of them, know nothing about operating a for-profit company, know very little about operating a highly regulated for-profit company. So it really takes a lot of creativity and ingenuity to work creatively within the regulation and within the law to be able to set up a successful revenue positive business. It's incredibly challenging. Like some of the things, for example, the regulations dictate is that we cannot have more than two signs outside of our store saying who we are. So no taglines, no marketing posters. We cannot display any cannabis product from the street. We're supposed to initially, at the time when they first launched the program in the state, we're supposed to actually darken the windows, which is crazy, right? So you have two, and the signs can't be that bright. They can't be illuminated. They can't be neon. They can't be a certain color palette. So I couldn't use this red for a sign, for example, because it's too bright. So all these restrictions that really made it very, very difficult. But just like from day one, trying to find a real estate piece of real estate with a landlord that was willing to lease to a brand new company that does not have a corporate guarantee, but then also a cannabis company, which is still federally illegal. So any landlord that has a federally backed mortgage is not able to lease to a cannabis company. Because it's still federally illegal. So there were so many, I could go on and on. There were so many different challenges, but definitely the biggest one was probably securing financing and securing the space. And, finding the talent was probably one of the easiest parts, but it was just having to deal with all the regulations initially as we got launched.
It's almost like the flip of normal startups, because when you talk to other entrepreneurs, it's like finding the talent is the hardest part for them. They start out as solo entrepreneurs and they struggle with being able to bring on people. You mentioned some of the challenges that are specific to cannabis businesses. And there are a couple of others that I want to go through. Since, as you mentioned, it's still illegal federally, you've got limited access to traditional banking services. Mentioned the regulations. There are higher tax burdens on cannabis businesses. There are even regulations about how a product is transported, which means that you have logistical or supply chain issues. Like, how did you navigate those things in order to get to a place where you were, a fully functioning business?
Yeah, really challenging. I have a couple of other partners, and so there's two partners that are very active and one that's silent. Between the four of us, we really had to raise funding from friends and family, and we put our savings into the initial capital contribution came from our personal savings. So having additional partners was essential in this case because there was no way that I could self-fund the launch of this company, a retail business in a busy commercial strip in New York City. It just would have been impossible. And so that was super important. We also had someone on our team who had worked in cannabis prior, who had experience operating a dispensary in Massachusetts. So that was also very, very important. I think, the state kind of sold to a lot of folks who receive these licenses that you just open up your doors and you make tons of money and you can become a millionaire overnight. But certainly it's not the case. It's a very technically heavy and just very complicated industry. And for me, it was essential to partner with good people who had access to capital and also had experience working in the industry in a different market.
Yeah. You opened what you call, quote, elevated dispensaries meant to redefine the cannabis experience. What
Yes.
does that mean?
Yeah, so at the time when we first opened our first dispensary, we were the third legal dispensary to open in the States. At the time when we opened, this was back in February 23, there were still 3,000 illegal, illicit brick and mortar shops in New York City in the five boroughs. And so we very purposefully wanted to distinguish ourselves from the illicit market. So we really leaned into design. I spent a lot of time interviewing dispensary designers from around the world, actually. Some from Canada, a lot from the West Coast, and some from the East Coast, architecture firms and just retail architecture firms. We finally landed on this amazing design firm, Leong Leong, which is owned by a pair of Chinese American Hawaiian brothers who are based in Chinatown. They did a lot of affordable housing projects. They did a lot of contemporary art museum projects and like high-end retail. They had never designed a cannabis dispensary before. But for us, we really wanted to develop a brand that really felt like a New York brand and not like a weed brand from California. Our first location was very close to Parsons Design School and to the New School and to a number of other universities and cultural institutions as well. We really wanted to have a really fun kind of spectacular space that really was kind of drew people in immediately. And so that was what we set out to do.
And not just that, but you've put a lot of thought and effort into consumer education and the customer experience inside your stores, right?
Yeah, for sure. We invest a lot on talent. So, we've been able to source talent because of my partnership with this amazing partner, Paul Yao, who connected us with this fantastic cannabis headhunting firm. But our first group of hires had no cannabis experience. That was just like a cold posting on Indeed. And I think we got like 600 applicants that we reviewed in 2 weeks and hired 50 people. So it was a very, very quick process. And many of those initial people did not have any retail experience at all. I think 80% were probably brown and black. And so we developed a really robust training program where we took them through, which we still utilize today, which we've just kind of improved upon, but it's a 40 hours of paid classroom training where we go through the history of cannabis, the impact of cannabinoids on the endocannabinoid system, and then also customer service training and kind of basic sales training. And so it was a very robust training. We also, the first store was in partnership with the Doe Fund. And so some of the former clients of the Doe Fund who are now employees of the Doe Fund came to speak with their first cohort and talk to them about their experience of being incarcerated and living on the streets, and kind of the work the Doe Fund does. So it was, a really impactful, emotional, week-long training of that first cohort, and we became very, very close. We became like a family, and then we do ongoing training. So we had the brands come in. In order to be on our shelves, you have to commit to training our team. So the brands come in 2-3 times a week and train our bud tenders. We also now have launched kind of a web-based additional training platform as well. We have hired a dedicated learning and development specialist who comes from Cannabis, this amazing man who was arrested for cannabis possession when he was younger. He's a Black man from Philadelphia, and he's worked in the cannabis space for a very, very long time. So he kind of leads all the trainings now. But it's evolved, and we continue to improve upon the training that we provide to our team. Our goal is to have the most trained and the best trained bud tenders in New York State, hands down. And I think we have achieved that.
Yeah. And in addition to the training that you do for the staff, there's a lot of education that you do for your customers.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we provide consultations for our customers. And so there's some customers, we have a lot of regulars who come in and they want to just come in and place an order very quickly. And so we have, kiosks, iPads that are positioned throughout the store where they can come in and just enter their order very quickly and get in and out in less than literally 7 minutes. But for folks who are new to consuming cannabis, the team on the sales floor, our bud tenders, can provide very, very intense consultations. So like at Union Square, for example, a few months ago, there was a pair of like 90-year-old women who spent 45 minutes with one of our bud tenders going through all the products and talking to him about kind of all their aches and pains and their ailments and how they need help with sleep and inflammation. And we do a lot of work directing people to the best products to fit their needs. I think it's interesting that people automatically assume that people who shop at a cannabis dispensary or who consume cannabis are just consuming cannabis to get high. And that's just not the case at all. So many people come in because they need cannabis to just make it through their day because of severe anxiety or ADD. They need cannabis to sleep at night. They need to help with inflammation. We have a lot of people come in post-surgery because they've been prescribed a lot of opioids and they don't want to take all the recommended opioids, or they kind of titrate with cannabis. We have a lot of chemo patients that come in. So it's a wide variety of people who come in for lots of different reasons. And most folks who come in and really are consuming because they have a real need to do so.
That all seems very aligned with your mission of changing how people view cannabis. Tell us
Yeah.
more about that.
Yeah, a big part of the work we're doing is kind of trying to reduce the stigma around consumption, which is why we've leaned into these kind of high-end, elevated, fun dispensaries to make it more approachable. Even though these are fancy dispensaries in one regard, it's really important for us that everyone feels safe in our spaces. And so we have all different types of clients, right? We have construction workers who are working down the block from our Fifth Avenue store. We have immigrants. We have, seniors. Quite a bit of seniors come in. We have tourists. Folks with very little education up to graduate degrees, and judges and doctors, and nurses, and lots of different folks from various different walks of life come in. And so it's super important that we have a very approachable space to really break down the stigma, and so people feel comfortable talking to our bud tenders about kind of what their needs are. We do a lot of events. So like, for example, we were the first cannabis company to sponsor the New York Film Festival. We are the first cannabis company this year to sponsor the New York City Pride Parade. We do a lot of events with non-cannabis companies to kind of try to break down the stigma around consuming. We've been kind of leaning into these really cool cannabis bars lately at events. For folks who are trying to replace alcohol with cannabis. And so a lot of it is really trying to break the stigma and to normalize consumption.
Yeah. Your business is a purpose-driven one, intentionally designed to ensure that legalized cannabis benefits those communities that were most harmed during the war on drugs. You mentioned the firm earlier, which I'm not sure if everyone knows what that is. So if you could speak a little bit more about that and share with us some of the ways that the travel agency makes sure that communities that were harmed are benefiting.
Yeah, so the Doe Fund is a tremendous organization. They've been around for almost 38 years, more than 35 years. They have served over 30,000, primarily Black and brown men, all who are formerly homeless or formerly incarcerated. I'm sure you've seen them on the streets of New York. They're typically wearing blue jumpsuits, sweeping the streets, which seems kind of like a demeaning job. But for many of these folks, they literally were on the streets just months prior. And this is kind of transitional employment, paid employment to help them get on their feet. And so the Doe Fund provides paid employment, social services, but also transitional housing. And then they help to place them in permanent jobs and permanent housing. And I think one of the most amazing things is that they, I think of it's like 60% or 70% of their employees are actually graduates of the Doe Fund. So it's a big community of folks who are really grateful for this opportunity. And the Doe Fund is actually the owner of our first dispensary in Union Square. They own 51% of the business, and we direct 51% of the profits to the Doe Fund and the work that they're doing. Because of this partnership, the Doe Fund is on their way to eliminating this fee that they have charged all of their clients, I think since inception, that they've been trying to get rid of for the last 20 years. And so the services now they provide to the men in the Doe Fund are free because of the partnership that they have with the travel agency.
So profits are going directly to nonprofit organizations. You mentioned earlier about hiring some people who were formerly incarcerated.
Yeah, for sure. So we have this amazing partnership with the Cannabis Justice and Equity Initiative. It actually was founded by a graduate of the Doe Fund, Terrence Coffey, who's now an adjunct professor at NYU, and he was incarcerated for 19 years. He came out, got his GED, and became a professor. He's an incredible man, great friend, and he's partnered with a Jamaican American immigrant from the South Bronx who actually went to Wesleyan and Harvard, who worked at a very large cannabis multi-state operator for a number of years. And they partnered together to create a training program for returning citizens, individuals, primarily equally men and women, who were recently released from prison to work in the legal cannabis space. They also have a very, very robust expungement clinic where they help to expunge the records of people who are still incarcerated for minor cannabis offenses. And so we support that program financially, but also providing technical assistance, lecturing to the cohorts, helping them with preparing for interviewing with cannabis companies, and then also hiring some of those folks as well. And so we were one of the first supporters of that organization, and they do amazing work. We also have partnerships with Kingsborough Community College. We hire out of their cannabis program. Hospitality Pathways is also another not-for-profit that trains mostly people of color from marginalized communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the racist war on drugs to work in the legal cannabis space. So, and we're always looking for new partnerships. So we're always open to new ideas. But, I think a big part of working in cannabis is the commitment to giving back. Much of that being mandated by the amazing legislation that the state has put out to legalize it, but also just because cannabis is all about community and making sure that we're, making our community a better place.
Yeah. And one of the other things I know that you do is support Black-owned brands through shelf space.
Yeah, for sure. We prioritize bringing in BIPOC, Black-owned, women-owned, queer-owned, veteran-owned, and legacy-owned brands as well, which has been, it's been challenging. I've seen a lot. We've only been operational since February 23, so barely 2 years, 2.5 years, and there's been a few Black brands, unfortunately, who have come and gone. But there are some ones that have survived, and there's still some new Black brands that are coming to market now. I wish there was more because it's like an amazing opportunity. It doesn't require as much capital. And then, once cannabis becomes loosened federally, there'll be lots of opportunities for expansion nationwide. So I encourage folks to explore that opportunity. It's definitely challenging sometimes to raise capital in the cannabis space, but happy to talk to anyone who's interested in exploring getting into the space because we need more Black-owned brands. We have a handful now, and we do all we can to support those brands, but I wish we could do more.
Yeah. In its first year, your flagship store served more than 125,000 customers and generated $5 million in tax revenue. Last year, you became the first cannabis brand to have 3 dispensaries in New York City, and your growth continues with 4 locations now. What do you think have been the keys to your success?
Being really nimble and being able to move quickly. So because we had some access to capital through one of our partners, we were able to move quickly. And also just because we all had backgrounds in real estate. Most of us, or many of us, it was kind of easier. I feel like we had an upper hand in trying to secure retail space within the city, which can be very, very challenging. So we had some of the right relationships in order to secure leases in high profile retail locations. So being able to be very nimble and be very quick on our feet and being able to change our approach because the laws in New York State are literally changing almost every week. At the time, maybe it was even every month. So we have to constantly change kind of our model and our plan and our approach. And we were able to do so because we were not wedded to any specific strategy, right? So we were willing to be flexible. And, I think my partners and I think coming from politics, we kind of thrive in high stress environments. Like we had to go through maybe 3 injunctions in New York State where the program just stopped. And we for our Fifth Avenue location or second location, we just weren't able to open for 3-4 months. And we didn't know when we would be able to open because there was just no end in sight during that time. So it definitely requires a lot of fortitude, a lot of strength, and access to resources for sure, because there are a lot of people that just did not survive those injunctions. So incredibly challenging, but being able to be flexible, I think, is the most important thing.
Yeah. And as you mentioned some of those challenges, what are the biggest challenges that the business is facing right now as you continue to scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still probably the illicit markets, and the fact that there's a very robust cannabis market or hemp market that's not regulated, which is the intoxicating hemp market, which allows companies nationwide to ship intoxicating hemp beverages and products into New York State and not be licensed or not be regulated. They don't have to pay the high tax rate that we pay. So we're competing with other companies that don't have to follow the same rules that we're following, which is very, very challenging. And then it's a nascent market. So it's just still very, very unpredictable. We just don't know how big the market's going to get. Obviously, there's been market studies that the state's conducted that shows that New York State has the potential to grow into a $5 billion market for cannabis in this state. I think right now we're barely at 2 billion. I think we're like 1.5 billion. So there's still lots of opportunities for growth, but trying to set up the systems and the structures to allow to support the legal cannabis industry has been challenging. There's in my opinion, there's poor leadership in Albany and in New York City. So there wasn't nearly as much done around enforcement as should have been done early on. And the agency that regulates the legal cannabis industry in New York State has gone through a tremendous amount of changes. There are very few people there actually understand what it takes to operate a legal cannabis business. So having to advocate for ourselves and unify the industry has also been challenging because it feels there's insurmountable hurdles that we're all overcoming, and it's hard to have a successful lobbying effort because we're still so young and just trying to survive. So those are some of the challenges that we continue to face.
Yeah. Well, I think if anyone is the right person to advocate with the government, it would be you.
It definitely adds value for sure. Having that experience in government is super important in cannabis, without a doubt.
You mentioned earlier that you encourage, any entrepreneurs who are interested to get into this space. There's a lot of opportunity, and that you're happy to talk with them. So we're going to have you give them some advice right now. As someone who is not only doing well business-wise, but making such an impact on the industry, what advice would you share with aspiring entrepreneurs who want to get into this space?
Yeah, I would say, you really have to align yourself with people with capital and with some sort of experience in cannabis. Cannabis is a very, very tricky industry. So whether that's, a cannabis consultant or someone that has built a cannabis brand before that can serve as your mentor, finding someone who's able to provide you with access to the right lawyers, the right accountants, the right, POS system, for example, the right headhunter is super important. And then I think, just being bold enough to just go out and just, ask what you need for in terms of capital is super important. I think there's a lot of people who are very trepidatious and intimidated by the cannabis industry because it's really high on the it requires a lot of understanding of regulation. But with the right support, I think there's just so much opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much, Arana, for sharing your small business success story. Everyone out there, please take a look at the company website, thetravelagency.co. That's CO, not .com. You can also follow them on Instagram at thetravelagency.co, on X at Travel Agency Co, and on LinkedIn at The Travel Agency Co. Check out the video channel on blackenterprise.com to find Sisters Inc. and other shows from Black Enterprise editors, writers, and experts. Be sure to subscribe to Sisters Inc. on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, or YouTube. And if you like what you hear, show us some love by leaving a 5-star review or put a sister on by spreading the word. This is Elisa Gums with Sisters Inc. for Black Enterprise. Thank you for listening. For 5 decades, we've had your back. Sisters Inc. and Black Enterprise have everything you need to elevate your excellence.